What I'm going to talk about today is kind of a crash course and how to up your type game, particularly with an emphasis on data visualization. So I'm going to start with this poster. I really like this poster. It has this saying, there's a saying in graphic design where we say, good typography is invisible. And this poster has overlaid bad typography is everywhere. And of course, the point of this is that bad typography kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. It's kind of in your face. And good typography, on the other hand, just blends into your design so that it doesn't stick out. It just is serving as an accompaniment piece to whatever design you have. And that's really the goal of this entire talk, is to figure out ways in order to make our good typography invisible. So this saying actually comes from Oliver Richtenstein, who is the founder of Information Architects. He has offices in Berlin, in Zurich, in Tokyo. In a Verge article in 2012, he says, let me just minimize this. Okay, he says, good design is invisible. Good screen design happens in the subatomic level of micro typography. And micro typography is it's the exact definition of a typeface. The invisible grid of macro typography, that's how the typeface is used. And the invisible world of interaction design and information architecture. Minimum input, maximum output with minimal conscious thought is what screen designers focus on. So the idea here is that the user has to do a minimum amount of work to get the maximum message out of the type. So we're going to focus on this talking about 2 tips for micro typography and 3 tips for macro typography. Okay, so I've separated this into 5 tips. The first tip is avoiding casual fonts. The second one is identifying readable typefaces. The third one is establishing a hierarchy. The fourth, create a system. And the fifth, employing clever callouts. Okay, so let's start with avoiding casual fonts. So as Goof mentioned, I teach and at a local college. I'm in the art department. And one of the problems that I run into, and it's not really a problem, it's just kind of a process that my students go through when they're learning, is a lot of my freshmen and sophomores will do something that I call the Coca-Cola font problem. I'll give them a project to work on, and in that project, they have free reign to pick whatever fonts they want, do whatever design they want within a parameter. And a lot of times they'll go to a website called Dafont, D-A-F-O-N-T. And on Dafont, there are a lot of really fun, interesting fonts. For instance, there's a Coca-Cola font. There's a thriller font that looks scary and there's blood dripping off of it and things like that. So what my students will do is they'll get real excited about these fonts and they'll use them in their project. And it's part of the process. A lot of times, though, what you'll see with these projects is that the fonts are so expressive, they have so much personality that they end up overtaking the rest of the project. So you end up seeing the design that was put into the font and less of the design on the rest of the page. So fonts have personalities, just like we do. And this graphic comes from a book called Stop Stealing Sheep, which is a really good book that was published, I think it was in the 80s or 90s. And it's still, it shows you kind of how slow ideas move in the type world, that, you know, a book that was published 30 years ago is still as relevant today, you know, as it was when it was published. But on the left-hand side, we can see the word doubt. So all of these font faces have a personality that's doubtful. So if we look at the second line here at Bodega Sans Light and Bodega Serif Light, you can see the bowl on the letter B kind of looks like somebody is kind of shrugging their shoulders, or, you know, just it has sort of a sloping form to it. And that really indicates the feeling of doubt. Above that, runic condensed is these letter forms are squished together. And when they're squished together like that, that kind of gives a certain personality as well. The second from the bottom, Harlem slang. That has, in traditional type, we have downward strokes, which are thicker than upward strokes. And this reverses that. So if you look at the letter B, the downward stroke is thin and the upward stroke is thick. And so that kind of gives you the feeling of doubt as well, because you're not, it's different than what we're used to seeing in type. In this intersection, we have surprise. You can see the second letter Gothic slang has unusual characters for letter forms. The second to the last has the word surprise using the Dizzy font. And these are letter forms that are just up and down and not consistent. And then of course, joy all the way on the right. These are three fonts which do a really good job of indicating a feeling of joy. We have the big open O and the Y that almost looks like it's very expressive with the, like your arms are spread out above your head. So fonts have personalities. In this top row, we see a font called Manslava. It's a very casual font. It's a handwritten font. It makes you feel like this is like you might be on vacation, right? It's just a very a personable font. So if you saw this font, there's two problems with using a font like this in a data visualization. The first problem is it competes with the actual data. Your eye will go to that font to figure that font out as a piece of visual interest. Just like when I look at my students' work, if they use a very expressive font, a lot of times that will overtake the design. Same is true here. And another thing that it does is it implies that your data visualization is about something that it might not be about. So if you were to look at this top row and you see Portugal, which is this casual type of, this Manslava font, which is this casual font, you might think that this is a data visualization about places to vacation. The actual visualization is on the bottom row. This is data, this is COVID data about COVID cases. So you can imagine how the type is really important because it needs to match the data. You don't want a vacation font when we're talking about COVID numbers, obviously. So what are the ideal font emotions for data visualization? Calm, approachable, warm, informative, simple. These are just some words of the feelings that you want to get when you are using type in a data viz. To get more specific, within sans serif fonts, there are different classifications. Grotesque and neo-grotesque. These are the older type of sans serif fonts. They're more formal, they're more rigid. They do look great in a data viz. However, they tend to be a little bit more sterile, which is perfectly fine for some data vizzes. Futura is a type of geometric font, and there's a handful of geometric fonts which are built using math, so they have more of a square feel to them. Gil Sans is a humanist font, and these are the more popular fonts that you see now. This is a more modern feel, a more friendly, approachable feel. So the humanist fonts, again, are really kind of the fonts that you see most people using for their projects nowadays. It has a very modern feel to it. This is an example of 4 different modern fonts. This is from Typewolf. All of these are really beautiful. They make a design automatically look good just because they're high quality fonts. Typewolf has a lot of great articles about how to use really good fonts, including humanist fonts, within your projects. Okay, so that is about personalities in fonts, with the idea that you just want to keep an eye on personality and what your font is saying about your data. So the second point is to identify readable typefaces. And this is really getting into that micro, how typefaces are put together aspect of typography. So imagine you're driving down the interstate, 65 miles an hour, and you see your exit coming up, and your exit sign looks like the one on the left. So a lot of people say Comic Sans, typographers hate Comic Sans. Well, typographers hate papyrus as much as we hate Comic Sans. And this is from the Chickentown Gazette. This on the left is papyrus font. There are a few things with papyrus font that make it more difficult to read than, say, Universe or Interstate, which you see on the right. And that is the strokes on the letter forms are distressed. So already our mind has to do a little bit of extra work in order to figure out what those letter forms are. The A, you can see, has been dropped below the baseline. The E's have such a small counter that they almost collapse. And if you look at the E, the large E for East, it has sort of a weird, the center line is up towards the top of the cap. And so it makes your brain have to do a little bit more work to put together what that information is. And you can imagine if you're going fast down the interstate, that's not the time when you want your brain to have to do any extra work. And that's why a lot of studies and research has been done into picking the most appropriate font for highway signs. Dido is what's called a high contrast font. It has these very thin, what are called hairline strokes that go to very thick strokes. So it has this thin, thick stroke dynamic, and that is considered high contrast. For example, Vogue magazine has this high contrast font. They used Dido. They also have their own proprietary font called Vogue, which has these thick, thin strokes as well. It's great for a display. It's great for a title. It's very fashionable. It's beautiful. On the other end of that is a font like Rockwell. Rockwell is a slab serif, and it's in a group of fonts called monoline, which means the entire width of the stroke for every letter form is the same exact width. So if you go all the way around the O, there's no thinning of that stroke in any place. Why do we care? Okay, so contrast, that thin to thick contrast, is something to take into account when we're talking about small text. And with data visualization, a lot of times we're using small text. We're using small text for accesses or callouts, or maybe we just have a lot of text within a copy area. When you start to shrink down type, Dido, which is the second row here, the hairline strokes start to break down. You can see in this example where the O and the E, the edge of that stroke has really started to disintegrate. And that makes it really hard to read because your brain has to do the extra work to figure out what that letter form is. Compare that to Futura, which is a monoline font. And the monoline font has this even stroke all the way through. Now, ideally, the perfect contrast would be a combination between that you would have some contrast. So you wouldn't have absolutely no contrast. It makes it easier to read when there's a slight bit of contrast. And for that, I include Lato, and I use Lato a lot in this presentation. I like Lato quite a bit. But there are other fonts that have this as well. I think Lato has a great combination of stroke widths from the thin to thick at small sizes. Okay, let's talk about Helvetica, everybody's favorite font from the 20th century. This was the most popular font in the 20th century. It's been used everywhere. It's on the Target logo. We see it in IKEA packaging. It's the official font for writing the cigarette warnings on the side of cigarette packages in the EU. It's used in the subway system in New York City. There's a documentary about Helvetica. So Helvetica really took the type world by storm when it came out. I believe it came out in the 1940s. It has a very generous X height. So X height is defined literally as the height of the lowercase letter X, but it also typically is the height of most of the lowercase letters as well. So it has this big X height, and you can see the dot above the letter I, that's called a title, and it's a perfect square in Helvetica. The open part of the letter A is called a counter. So let's talk about counters first. So remember, that's the open part of the letter A. So as we shrink text, or as we become more expressive in our typography, the shape of the counter can get squashed. So if you see in the first example, this is marker felt. The shape of the A is getting squashed as we shrink down the size. And you can imagine if we make this font even smaller, that A could collapse completely, which makes it really hard to read that letter form. League Gothic is another example of what's happening when you get to a smaller size. You can see the A and the L of the word small. It kind of meshes together, and it makes it an inconsistent viewing, that it has like weird letter spacing in between those letters. Any kind of condensed type becomes somewhat difficult to read at smaller sizes. The letter forms run together. And let's see what's next. Okay, X height. Let's talk about X height. So again, the X height is the letter of the height of the letter X. We talked about, let's go to Athelis, the second line here, and you can see that the X height of this is a little bit shorter than, say, the next line, which is Open Sans, where the X height is much more generous. Both of these are 10-point pixel size, but they look substantially different because of the height of their X height. I would say Open Sans, however, has too much X height. It's too bubbly. It's almost too big. I prefer, again, Lotto, which is my example here. I like the height of Lotto. I think it's like a perfect X height for readability. Okay, so there's a lot of good paid for fonts. Some good paid for fonts are Gotham, Proxima Nova, Adele. But there's a lot of good free fonts now too that you can get from Google. And I'm big at exploring free fonts and helping people really as a gateway to get into fonts, to try the really good Google fonts. So here are a list. Montserrat, it has this nice big X height. It has really clean letter forms. Libre Franklin is a sans serif font that is kind of, you could use almost as a dupe for the New York Times Franklin. Prompt has these nice clear letter forms. Assistant is probably in my top 3 favorite fonts of sans serifs from Google. And Work Sans is a pretty good one too. I would say it has a little bit too much letter spacing, but it is a really nice font. It's nice and clean. On the serif side, we have Merriweather and Laura, which are 2 really nice serif fonts. If you're interested in learning more about these specific type of things, I did write a blog post for Nightingale, the Data Visualization Society magazine, and you can access that at this link. And I'll also include my slides so you guys can take a better look at this if you need to. Okay, the next part that I want to talk about is establishing a hierarchy. This is from the New York Times, and I'm a big fan of New York Times. This establishes a really beautiful hierarchy. You can see we have a nice clear header where new cases are increasing. It's nice, it's bold, it's a serif font, and then a repeatable pattern for the rest of this visualization. We have California, Virginia, North Carolina, all of the states in a black font. And then below that, we have the third layer of hierarchy, which is in a gray font. It's easy to understand because the hierarchy has been laid out for us visually. So hierarchy matters. This is an example of a hierarchy gone a little wrong. It starts out good. We have a nice strong header and we have a nice copy. So we're doing good so far. But then after that, the rest of the visualization starts to break down a little. On this visualization, there are 8 different font sizes. If you look at County Leader and Urban Counties, the 2 bold secondary levels, they are 1 pixel difference in size. And really, it doesn't make a lot of logical sense why County Leader and Urban Counties would be 1 pixel difference in size. Those could really be the same size. And so I think a little bit of thought of how do we want to do our hierarchy, and just picking a few styles, 2, 3 styles, And sticking with that to establish a really strong hierarchy gives your users something they can count on. And maybe they don't notice that it's 1 pixel difference, but if you do this too often, and you can see where county leader is, we have county leader, then Warnock, Loffler, and then size of lead. That's 3 different font sizes. And if we go all the way to the top, we're actually talking about 5 different font sizes just right in a row. So it can be a little bit confusing as to what the hierarchy is. And your users might wonder, what am I supposed to look at first? How does this work? One other bit of critique that I would have for this is the maps at the bottom. There are 4 cities, and we know Atlanta is the biggest city in Georgia. However, the word Atlanta is about 1 pixel font size bigger than the rest of the 3 cities. My suggestion would be just make them all the same. If you're using something like a Google map or a Slippy map, it does make sense to make the font sizes different for the city sizes. But if you're just replicating a map like this and you only have 4 cities that you're labeling, then it doesn't have as much importance if it's only 1 pixel size difference. This is from the Washington Post, and I think this is really well done, and this is a very difficult thing to achieve. They have used 1 font and 2 different sizes. The top font is a bold header, and we can tell that that's the header. And then the rest of the entire visualization uses the same size font. Lower turnout and higher turnout have a bit of a different treatment. They're bold and they're in caps. But for the rest of the visualization, including the labels of the states, all of the fonts are the same size. It makes the visualization look very sturdy and solid, and it kind of has a level of calmness to it that you have a very deliberate visualization, a very deliberate hierarchy being built here. So this is an example of how that particular visualization was working. So if we think about this just as a strong hierarchy, we have a header. This is using all assistant font in this visualization on the left, and this is just a dummy mock-up. So we have a header which has a bold 20 pixel font size, and then all of the rest of the font is the same size. And this is just one solution of many solutions to simplifying your hierarchy. All right, so overlapping the last hierarchy, we also have creating a system, and they're very similar with slight differences. So we can take a hierarchy, a strong hierarchy, and we can then convert that into a system. Medium has a great system. If you use Medium, they have a nice, beautiful type treatment. They have a system where they have subheaders, which are in a sans serif font, and all of their copy, which is in a serif font. And as you go from article to article, it keeps the same layout and the same type treatment. And this system kind of helps your brain just kind of jump from thing to thing to thing without having to reinterpret what is happening on that page and how to read that information. It is possible to override Medium, but if you ever write an article in Medium, I think it helps the user just to keep the standard design that has been provided for you. Here's another example of a system. This infographic is from COVID, and every time the word infect shows up on the infographic, it shows up in red. And every time we see a number, the number is bolded. And the people are the same color as the word infected when they're infected. And when they're not infected, then the people are in black. And this is just a portion of that infographic. It actually is quite long, but it allows the user to scan really quickly and get a lot of meaning out of it based on that color scheme. This is a visualization called Tractus Logico-Philosophicus. Hopefully I said that right. And I really love this visualization. It's simple. It reminds me a little bit of the Medium. It has a sans serif font called Active Grotesque for the headers, and it uses that same sans serif font inside the visualization that's on the left. So you can imagine as you're scrolling and you can see that you have this next section, you can expect that it will have that sans serif treatment. And that's created a system that we can count on as users, and we can use it as a navigation. All right, so this is New York Times. I think New York Times has mastered the systems game. Anytime, and they've done this for years too, so this is a consistent treatment of font. Anytime you're reading a article or copy, you see a serif font, and the serif font indicates that you're in a place of long reading or a place of a lot of copy. When they do their visualizations, they switch to their Franklin New York Times sans serif fonts. So we have two different classifications of fonts, one for the copy and one for the data viz. And once you've seen this enough, your brain kind of clicks in that, okay, we're in a section where we're going to be reading the story. Okay, we're in a section where we're going to have to turn on our analytical brain and figure out what this visualization is about. Okay, so some techniques to try. This is one technique that is using all of the same font size, all of the same font. It's a good idea. It's a good application on dashboards. If you have a lot of dashboards with a lot of cards, this is from Google Trends. They use all the same font size and all the same font. And it just makes it really nice and clean. And this is an individual card within a lot of cards within their Google Trends dashboard. Another one is a big header, and using the same font. This is using Noto Sans. We have a big header, and the rest of the font are the same size, 14 pixels. So Noto Sans is a really interesting font. I like this font a lot because it is created to look the same with multiple scripts. So if you write something in English or you write something in Russian, the fonts will have, if you're using Noto Sans, the fonts will have the same width and the same features and look consistent throughout whatever language you're translating it into. This is an example of thick to thin. So we have a thick header and a very light text within the visualization. This is from Reuters. And the visualization labels have a very thin, stroked, lightweight font. And it is a high contrast, not within the font itself, but within the two font choices. And finally, this one has a combination of a header, which is done in the sans serif font, and the rest of the data is done in a sans serif font. And a couple things to note about this is actually pushing it further than any of the other ones have, because we have multiple styles of bolding and lighter gray. Again, to bring it back to this example has a good system in place where we have bolded, we have black text, and we have gray text using color. Okay, and the last section, I want to talk about employing clever callouts. So this is again from the Washington Post, and if you haven't tried this technique, it's one of my favorites, and that is kind of destroying the legend, getting rid of the legend altogether. And anytime you want to anytime you want to color code data, just color code it within the text. So you can see here that the color coding for Biden is blue, and anywhere in the visualizations where the Biden is used, the same blue color is used as well. And that's true for Trump here in this visualization. So this helps bring your text into your visualization. This is a visualization that I worked on with Smithsonian data. And what I did here was I didn't want a legend. And so I ended up just bringing my users into the visualization by pointing to certain areas and showing what that bit of information was about and what that color indicated. Naughty Brimmer is excellent at creating these callouts. And so this goes beyond just legends and into an area of showing your users where to look. So you can imagine if you came on this visualization with a ton of circles that you might not know where to look. Like, where do I even start with this visualization? And this is where type really can help you to show your user how to use a visualization by using these clever callouts within the white space. This is one of my favorite techniques. Again, Naughty Brimmer does this really well. This is from the top 2,000 songs from the 70s and 80s. And she just labels out 10 items, and your mind can just, you can just look and see, okay, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. And then after you're done with the 10, if you're even more interested, then you explore the rest of the visualization. So really breaking that traditional formal mold of a graph and bringing your users in with clever callouts. This is another example of showing how to use flow in text to not be afraid to take your text and really push it into your data viz, and not to think of it as part of your data viz and not as a separate component. So this is called New Top 10 Furnace Cities in China, and it's from Yan Lu. And I like how he just uses the available space for callouts and text, and is helping the user of the visualization go on a journey. Okay, so trying to stay in my 25 minutes. So the top 5 are avoiding casual fonts, and remembering that fonts come with a personality. When you put them on a page, they've already been designed. They come with their own set of design, and you want to make sure that that is not conflicting or taking attention away from the rest of your layout. Identifying readable typefaces, understanding that not all typefaces are highly readable at small sizes, and remembering that what makes a good quality font might differ depending on how you're using that font. Establishing a hierarchy that is simple, that's not too complex, that your users can count on for knowing what's coming next and how to interpret your layout. Creating a system in order to, again, let your users know what's coming next, and something that you use over and over and over again so that your users have a consistent experience. And employing clever callouts. Really, the idea here is to not be afraid to bring your text into your data viz and to layer your text on top of your data visualization. So I do want to say that I am a big fan of looking at what other people are doing and seeing what I can learn from that. Pinterest actually has a ton of stuff. Arena has a ton of data visualizations, and looking at what other people are doing and trying to mimic how they're doing it is one of the best ways to learn. Fonts in use. This is a great resource it has a tag of data visualization. It's a great resource to find how other people are using visualizations as well, are using typography and visualizations as well. Okay, so that's all I got. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at any time. And I'll get back to you. Thank you.